Well, a Florida task force meets today to consider changes in the state's Stand Your Ground law in the wake of the Trayvon Martin shooting. Well, that's where we're taking the deep dive back into this battle over whether the law protects citizens or gives people a license to kill. Democratic State Senator Chris Smith isn't waiting for the governor's task force. He's formed his own group to look into the law and has released these recommendations. They include giving law enforcement more leeway to investigate controversial shootings and make the self-defense protection less available for criminals trying to escape punishment and escape jury trials, by the way. To do that, the plan includes a grand jury review for every Stand Your Ground case and a system that tracks cases in which defendants use it as a legal defense. Currently, that doesn't exist in Florida, and statistics have been used on both sides to bolster the arguments about the law, even though those statistics aren't available. Opponents point to FBI figures that show the number of justifiable homicides by private citizens have risen from 1,116 between 2000 and 2005, pre-Stand Your Ground, to 1,304 between 2006 and 2010, after Stand Your Ground. But supporters of the law point to statistics that show since 2006, the year 14 states joined the state of Florida in passing Stand Your Ground laws, that the violent crime rate across the country had fallen more than 13%. Over the same period, the national murder rate was down almost 15%. Supporters say they believe there is a connection between these new laws and the drop in violent crime. Opponents say the assumption that more guns in the hands of civilians means less crime is overly simplistic. New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg is spearheading a nationwide movement to get rid of Stand Your Ground laws. He says the law isn't about protecting people, it's about the gun lobby and the NRA.
In reality, the NRA's leaders weren't interested in public safety. They were interested in promoting a culture where people take the law into their own hands and face no consequences for it. Let's call that by its real name, vigilantism.
Joining me now is economist John Lott. He's the author of the book More Guns, Less Crime. He's also the co-author of a new book called Debacle. He joins me now. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Daily News that has gotten a lot of interest from people, both pro and con, on this law. So let me start with your response to Mayor Bloomberg that these laws simply encourage vigilantism.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard the mayor describe them as shoot-first laws, and nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, you have to understand where the laws were before. Before, people had to retreat as far as possible before they could go and act in self-defense. What this set up was a reasonable person standard, that if a reasonable person would feel that you were seriously threatened and in serious risk of either serious injury or death, then you could use appropriate force to go and respond. It's not you get to decide for yourself whether that's the case. But
here's the problem. But inherent in this argument is, let's look at the Trayvon Martin case.
Right.
There's only one living witness.
That's true in almost all murders.
But using the Stand Your Ground, you can't interview a dead person who cannot sit there and tell you their side of the story and find out whether George Zimmerman used an appropriate force or not.
Well, that's like saying then we can't get convictions in any murders. We might as well just give up on murders in general. And in fact, we have lots of forensic evidence in this case. We have other witnesses that saw it from the side. This is not something, you know, that law enforcement has an unusual case in front of them. And so, but what I will say is that no matter whose story's right, the Stand Your Ground law isn't relevant to the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case. If George Zimmerman's right, that and you know the wounds on the back of his head, that he was on the ground, Trayvon Martin was on top of him beating him, there was no place for him to retreat. And so the old defense, even if you had had the rule that you have to retreat as far as possible, you still would have been able to act in self-defense there. And if the other side's right, that somehow George Zimmerman provoked the attacked Martin to begin with, then he wouldn't be able to rely on the Stand Your Ground law to protect him in that case either. You can't. The Stand Your Ground law doesn't allow you to provoke an attack, doesn't allow you to throw the first punch. It doesn't allow you to go and shoot somebody in the back. You have to pass this reasonable person test that you're in direct threat, serious injury or death was going to occur.
But what about here's what I don't understand about this law. It strikes me as one of these laws that is a solution in search of a problem. There was not a widespread problem here of suddenly people feeling as if they were walking the streets, and instead, and because of the way, the role the NRA played in getting these laws passed, instead it seemed as if it was a law intended to justify gun ownership.
Well, you should read More Guns, Less Crime, because the third edition has lots of examples in there where we had problems before. These laws didn't arise in a vacuum. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. One case is you have a 67-year-old man. He pulls into a grocery store parking lot. A robber gets out, knocks him down. The 67-year-old man gets up, tries to run away. He gets knocked down a second time, tries to get up, run away a third time, gets punched and knocked down a third time. At that point, he pulls out his permanent concealed handgun and fatally shoots the robber. Now, the prosecutor said he still could have done more. He still could have run away even further and took him to trial. There was no prison involved there. He got probation. But, you know, here you're talking about somebody having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in defense. And the thing is, you have those types of examples in state after state that it occurred. And
but where is this an epidemic? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Where is this an epidemic? I mean, you can find one or two examples, and I understand the one where the Florida law was based on. It was following a hurricane. But it's one thing about protecting your domicile. It's another thing out on the streets. What's to prevent Stand Your Ground from being used as the basis to just deal with some sort of gunfight between two people that own guns legally who have an argument?
Well, if you have somebody that just goes and commits murder, then it's going to be handled like any other murder case. I can't just go and claim Stand Your Ground and they say fine and walk away. In fact, in the vast majority of cases that you use a gun in public, you're going to be arrested. I mean, that's virtually always going to be the case unless the police are just completely sure about what happened, and that just never happens.
Do you think some parts of Stand Your Ground in the state of Florida, the way they have a grand jury, that to basically not allow a judge to deny essentially somebody who's using the Stand Your Ground defense to deny a jury, essentially a prosecutor, from getting that person in front of a jury? Do you think that parts of the law needs refining?
Well, I mean, it's up to the prosecutor whether or not to go and bring the case. I mean, if you think prosecutors are relatively reticent to go and bring these types of cases, I suppose, but I don't see any evidence of that. You know, I think what they look at is whether they have a reasonable chance. Look at this case. This prosecutor didn't even go to the grand jury. I mean, you were talking about safeguards that were there. There's a reason why the prosecutor didn't go to the grand jury. I know they didn't have to legally, but you know the old story about prosecutors can indict a ham sandwich in front of a grand jury. The standards are low. You only need a majority of the votes that are there. The reason why they didn't do it is when you read the affidavit, there are huge holes in the affidavit. They don't even have evidence that Zimmerman attacked Trayvon Martin first. They don't even deal with the police report and the witnesses that indicated that Martin was on top.
Right, but we're finding out that the law enforcement officials believed that Stand Your Ground was going to be used and that there was basically no way around it.
But I don't see how that's relevant. I mean, explain to me the logic there. And that wasn't, there were others who didn't think it had anything to do with it. But if in either of the two cases, if Zimmerman attacked Martin or provoked him, it wouldn't be relevant. If Martin was on top of Zimmerman, there's no place to retreat. So whether you have Stand Your Ground or the previous standard, it would make no difference there either. How is this even relevant to the debate? I think what's happened is gun control proponents have latched onto this because they think that they can use this as a story. What it tells you is how few problems have occurred with this law. I mean, we have 41 states that have either castle doctrines or Stand Your Ground laws. Another 6 have rules involving common law type things. And we have, like, in the new book debacle, we show that about 7 million people have concealed handgun permits. And yet, with all that there, they're like no problems. I mean, this is the one that they have to go and try to latch on to.
John Lott, I have to leave it there. I am running up against a hard break. Mr. Lott,